Our next speaker in this session is Emmanuel Goffi, co-founder and co-director at the Global AI Ethics Institute and the Digital Ethics from Éditions du Numérique. He is a consultant in ethics applied to AI with tech companies and startups. Dr. Goffi is also research associate and a lecturer with institutes in France, Germany, Morocco, Canada, and Brazil. His speech is about AI ethics, the trees that conceal the forest. No doubt, a widely discussed subject. AI ethics has become a buzz phrase, overused to a point where its meaning is no longer questioned. A true and ill-defined phrase, the discussion has turned into a cosmetic, polarized opposition between technophobes and technophiles, which has annihilated any possibility for constructive debate. Critical thinking is key to freeing us from a deceptive narrative. Emmanuel, can you come on stage?
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. I hope you're not too tired. I will just try to make it as dynamic as possible. We'll talk a little bit about ethics, a little bit about philosophy, and what I really want to bring to you is a new perspective on what we call AI ethics is exactly, right? And I think that it's a phrase that has been overused and that we need now to discuss a little bit more. So it's just for you kind of a teaser, and I hope that leaving this room, you will try to delve into the subject and try to make your own work working on that. Already in the 5th century before current era, people, the sophists or the rhetoricians like Gorgias, were mentioning the fact that discourse is a great potentate. And we all know, we've learned that throughout those 26 centuries that words are key, words are really important, right? They're shaping the way we see the world, they're influencing our behaviors. We're using it in marketing, we're using it in communication, in many fields. We are all aware of that. We all think that it is kind of obvious to say that. But most of the time when we are acting, we do not really think about the impact of the words that we are listening here and there on our personal behaviors. And this is something that we really have to think about when it comes to so-called AI ethics. This is philosophy, but it's also something that has been demonstrated by social science, like sociology. Maybe some of you have heard about what we call the social constructivism. People like Peter Luckman and Thomas Luckman and Peter Berger, they've worked on that quite heavily, showing how actually words are carrying meanings, they are carrying values, and they're used to shape the world around, right? When we're using certain phrases, when you were using some words, we are actually creating a world, we are shaping the reality. And in turn, once this reality is there, it is also shaping our perceptions and our behaviors. So it's, you know, a continuous circle with words and the reality that we're creating. Everything that we're talking about, and especially when it comes to philosophy and ethics regarding artificial intelligence, is all about symbols that we're using, right? It's all about the verbs, the words that we're using, what we call the signs. And also, regarding the signs, maybe some of you have heard about linguistics and the work that has been done by French and Swiss philosopher, linguist, Ferdinand de Saussure, about this point, which is, I think, really important. Oops. When we're talking about signs, mostly we don't think that there are two things behind the signs. The first one is the signified, and the second one is the signifier. The signified basically is the concept, the meaning that you're giving to the word, right? While the signifier is the sound or the image of the word. When I'm talking, for example, about privacy, we all hear the same word. And if I write it, we can read the same word. But each of us in this room will put a different meaning behind this idea of privacy. This is true here in this very room, but it's even truer if you go outside of Croatia, outside of Europe, if you go in a different cultural setting. If you go to China, for example, privacy, you can use privacy in English. Chinese people will understand privacy. They will read privacy, they will see privacy, but the word will not ring the same bells as it is ringing to us. I say that in really different cultural, environments, but even in my country, in France, if you go in Paris, privacy is kind of really individualistic. It's all about you. You are the owner of your data. It's all about your own privacy. When you go to the southern France, when you go around the Mediterranean Sea, then your privacy will open to your next of kins, the next of family, your friends, maybe your community. If you go to Africa, you will open your privacy to even more people. So when I say privacy in let's say the setting of the GDPR in the European Union, that would not mean the same thing as privacy for African people, for Brazilian people, for Chinese people, right? So we always have to keep in mind that those words, they're made of two things. First, the signified, which is the concept, the meaning, and the signifier. The point I want to raise here is that most of the time we focus on the sound, on the image, right? And there are lots of people, there are lots of stakeholders that are actually using the lack of knowledge that we have about those differences to influence us. Nothing bad about that, right? It's all about communication, marketing, we're using that, right? You sell a word, you sell the meaning at the same time, and you say to people, okay, just take it as it is given, right? Take it for granted that discrimination must be avoided. Take it for granted that privacy is really important. Take it for granted that AI ethics is something important, and we buy it. We don't have time to delve into the concept, the meaning. We don't have time to read Ferdinand Saussure or Aristotle and philosopher and this kind of thing. But that's a big issue, because if we all buy the same word with all the same meaning, meaning that we have all the same sign, at the very end, what happens is that we are all thinking the same way. And as the quote by Benjamin Franklin goes, if everyone is thinking the same, then no one is thinking, right? So what we really need is to avoid thinking all the same. It's okay to, not being aware of these differences. But when it comes to AI ethics, that's really important because you all know that there is big money behind artificial intelligence, right? So obviously you get a lot of people that are trying to promote their own perspective, their own narrative. And this is something that I'm really critical against. This is the European Union play regarding AI ethics, saying, okay, you have to have this kind of trustworthy AI. That doesn't make sense. AI cannot be trusted. AI is not an agent. There is no intention in AI, except if some of us consider that AI is autonomous enough to make its own decision, which is not the case so far, right? So what the European Union is doing is it's selling a narrative that will make you reassured and that will make you buy the product. Once again, nothing wrong about that. What is wrong, on the contrary, is that they are doing that, selling the fact that AI ethics is all about promoting well-being for humanity. That's not the point at all. And let me be clear about that. It's not about me. Just read all the documents that have been published by the European Union, read all the papers, and you will see something that is really important. We'll go back to that a bit later. It's all about making money in a really competitive, setting against the US on one side, China on the other side, right? So we have a niche, which is the norm, and we're playing on that. So the problem is not that we are trying to make money over AI. The problem is that we are selling a product with a deontology, which is what you mentioned, this idea of cosmetics, which is the makeup you put on things that are not that beautiful, right? You're making it a bit more beautiful than they are really. So we are doing that. We are selling a product. We are selling something that is really beautiful, that is ethical, while what we're doing is just trying to promote our own interest, which is okay. We all want to have, a better well-being. So this idea is really important when it comes to artificial intelligence. That's the first part of the ethics or artificial intelligence ethics. We all use those two words now, right? This is the phrase that you've heard all around. But who actually is really wondering what artificial means and what intelligence means? Because if we dig into that, I can tell you for sure that we'll spend hours and we will not agree on the definition of intelligence. I don't even know if intelligence exists. I don't even know if natural intelligence exists, right? Look around, look at the mess that we are doing as human beings. I'm not sure that we're really intelligent, right? We could discuss that even from a philosophical point of view, right? And that would take hours. If you bring those two words in Asia, in Japan, in China, you will see that they do not use artificial intelligence. It's not the translation that they have. It's human-made intelligence, much more like that, right? So you will even see in the wording that the perspective is different. And when we're talking about artificial, if you have time, and maybe tonight, I don't know, just read Aristotle about what is artificial artifacts, and you will see that it's not that easy to say that it's artificial. I don't know what artificial means exactly, right? So we could discuss those two words for hours. So you put them together, and it is way ever ill-defined. Just, you know that, obviously, you know that these two words, this phrase has been coined by John McCarthy in 1955 during the proposal for the Dartmouth Conference that actually was held in 1956, right? That's a wording. You've all participated to conferences. When I'm participating in a conference, when I've asked to give a talk, obviously I try to choose the words that I will put, you know, on the program, because I want to tease you. I want to say, look, that's sexy, come and see. That doesn't work that much, as I can see, but that's okay. I've tried. So when they've done that, they created this idea of intelligent machines, right? The idea of McCarthy was to say, okay, we have to make something different than cybernetics, right? By Wiener cybernetics. So he wanted to make something really different. And the idea was to say, okay, we can create some kind of machines that would duplicate or mimic the human brains, the human intelligence. Let's call it artificial intelligence, right? Two words decided by one man in 1955, that has become something just crazy. That has become a reality. We are all talking about AI. Most of us do not even know where AI comes from, the word, right? Maybe you've discovered that it was John McCarthy in 1955, which would be great. I would have taught you something. But now it's the reality. We're all using those two words without even questioning them, right? It has become so important that it is considered as strategic for the European Union. Not only the European Union. The US and China are fighting against each other for AI. Saudi Arabia is, you know, putting a lot of money on that, right? You're seeing that Croatia is really dynamic. Morocco is really dynamic. You got a lot of places. Brazil is really dynamic in Southern America, right? We are all working on that, on AI. We have, I don't know if you know, if you've heard about John Austin. John Austin is a linguist, and he taught something. He wrote a really interesting book, which is, the title in English is How to Do Things with Words. Okay, you say a word, right? This is what we call performative utterances. You say a word, and the reality is just popping up out of nowhere. You say artificial intelligence, and now artificial intelligence is out there. But the question is where? The question is where? What is artificial intelligence? When we're discussing with people that are in the tech, which is not my case, most of the time what they say is that what we are doing with what we call AI has nothing to do with intelligence. It's algorithm, right? It's technical, but it's nothing that can be compared to human cognitive abilities. But for most of the people, I'm not talking about us because we are all into this area of artificial intelligence, but people in the street that are not aware of that, what they're buying is that out there are machines that can think like us, that can do the same thing as us, that could become terminators at some time, right? At some point, right? And kill people and make decisions. We all know when we work in that it's not true, but this is what we are selling. So when you have this kind of fear, what you have to do when you are the European Union, you have to say, okay, look, that might exist, but us in the European Union, because we are the heir of the Enlightenment, we're great philosophers, get a really high opinion of our own culture, we will make sure that that will never happen. You can trust AI. And then around trustworthy AI, the European Union has created a full narrative about privacy, accountability, transparency, all those words that are ill-defined, poorly defined, that you will not be able to define if you read all the documents, right? And we are all buying that, and we are now all trying to trust AI, which doesn't make sense. So that's all those words that at some point we really need to discuss, because behind those words, there are huge vested interests. And no problem with that. It's not judgmental. Obviously, we all want to make money. I'm trying to make money over AI ethics. That's my job, right? The point is that you have to be clear about what you're doing. Do not tell ethics of artificial intelligence when you're not doing ethics of artificial intelligence. So you get a lot of vested interests by countries, but also by some companies or even individuals that have strong interest promoting artificial intelligence. We are also a strong interest in influencing others. I don't know if you've followed what Thierry Breton has said quite recently. He was a bit concerned about the fact that China is trying to impose its perspective, its cultural perspective, let's say on privacy, this kind of things, through standards, right? So we've said, okay, we have to fight against that. But my concern as a philosopher is we are doing the same the other way. we are trying to impose to China, we are trying to impose to the Middle East, we are trying to impose to Southern America and Africa, our perspective on our problems, our concerns with our solutions. I used to say that that might be a bit sensitive as a subject, but I will just give that to you and you will think about it later. About discrimination, right? We all consider that discrimination is something that is unacceptable, and especially when it comes to data. You must not discriminate between genders, you must not discriminate between skin colors, right? But when you travel, you go in this or that country, you will see that discrimination is part of the identity of the people. Discriminating based on skin color in some places is totally acceptable, is even desirable because it makes you belonging to a community and makes you different from other communities. I don't have to give you examples of places where discrimination between gender is normal. It's cultural, it's here, right? And if you go to those countries saying, okay, you must not discriminate between male and female, people will say, okay, that's your stance, that's not our culture, right? So it doesn't mean that we have to accept that. It means that we have to accept that there are different perspectives. And it means that we have to question our own behavior regarding this kind of issue. So influence is a really strong weapon when it comes to norms. We cannot impose legal norms. It's really too hard, it takes time, you know, technology is moving at fast pace, we cannot follow the rhythm of technology with laws, right? So we are using what we call soft laws, which is ethics basically, but really low-cost ethics, right? Because it's quite flexible, you can change it from one week to another, so it's easier to use. But it's a really huge weapon. The question is, if I do not want Chinese people to influence my culture through AI, why would it be acceptable for Chinese people to be influenced by my culture through AI? Right, I'm working a lot with India, and in India there is a strong concern about the fact that AI might be the vehicle of Western values, right? So they're thinking about what we call the Vedic perspective on artificial intelligence, right? Trying to put the Vedas on the discussion. So all this is all about the construction of the reality, which makes us think that what we are doing is right and legitimate because it's us, the West. Great guys, really intellectual, strong history, strong culture, these kind of things, right? Which is kind of problematic to me, but AI, artificial intelligence, is what I called a UTO, an unidentified technological object. We don't know what we're talking about, but we are using it all the time, all the time, all the time. And this is where we really have to be cautious. When we're using artificial intelligence, we have to be really cautious about the people that we're talking to, right? To make sure that they really understand what it is exactly about, if it is possible. I will not go into the cosmetic things. The cosmetics is an idea that some people would call that, oh gosh, I just lost the word, but however, it's this idea that we know that AI might be problematic, that the consequences might be ugly, right? So we're trying to make it beautiful. This is the makeup on all these things that might happen with AI, and this is all the narrative that we're creating about that. Within the narrative, you have also a word that is really important, which is ethics. We are all using ethics in a really wrong way because most of us are not philosophers, right? And that's a big question when I come to companies and say, okay, you get someone that is in charge of ethics. Say, yeah, I got the chief ethics officer. So what is the background of this person? Oh, he or she is a lawyer. If I'm like, okay, when you want to buy meat, you go to the hairdresser? No. So why, when you need someone to do ethics, are you asking a lawyer? Or maybe the lawyer had courses about ethics at some point. I had myself some course about laws at some point. I'm not a lawyer. Right? I'm an ethicist. The problem is that most of the time, people that are playing this kind of role of chief ethics officer, there are people that are specialists in communication, specialists in marketing, or lawyers, right? And I would say that lawyers, and say that because you're here, lawyers are the least problematic people, right? But my issue is that when you need advices about what is acceptable and what is not regarding AI system, you really need to ask someone that has the background, right? That sounds obvious, right? But even each time I'm going to a company and I'm saying that, people say, yeah, but we have our CEO, that's okay. And she's a lawyer, right, cool, okay. But when something will happen to you that is beyond compliance, you will have problems. And I have I will not dig into that, but I have an example of a big company, a big international company, that actually called us, the Diététiciens du Numérique, because they were concerned about the fact that the guy who is in charge of ethics compliance, he is a lawyer, and actually called us and say, okay, I have reached the limit of what I can do. Because people are starting to ask me about philosophical, metaphysical questions, ontological questions, and I don't have the tools. I cannot answer that. So I'm just trying, and he was really honest about it. He told us, I'm just trying to bring that back to legal things, right? But I see that I'm doing something that is wrong, because if something happens on the ethical perspective, my company will face problems, and I will face problems because I am responsible for that, right? So he's asking us to help them, which is a good point. So we'll not go deep into ethics, and I will just stop here, I guess, because there are a question, maybe. It's really important to, once again, keep in mind that ethics is a really complex field. It's not, ethics doesn't mean good. When we talk about ethical AI, that doesn't mean ethic. Ethics is about bad and good. You're doing something bad, that's ethics, right? So there is a misuse of ethics. There is an overuse of ethics, which is really problematic. And this is also a use that is really limited to the Western world. And this is something that you can see here on the slide with Professor Angladarom, is talking about Buddhism. What about Buddhist ethics? What would be the stance of the Buddhists regarding the use of artificial intelligence that must be brought also to the table to have this kind of big issue? I will not go through that because I don't want to. Just keep this in mind, really important philosophy, Ludwig Wittgenstein, saying that the limits of my language mean the limits of my words. Obviously, if your language is really limited, your perspective is really limited, right? So you have to open your language space, you have to open to new possibilities, right? And you really have to dig into all those things, and you really have to question all this narrative if you don't want to have your really shrinked mind. I will stop that. Sorry for that. Thank you.
Thank you for your amazing speech. We have 3 more minutes for a Q&A session. Does anyone have a question for?
Lawyer has a question. Lawyer always has a question. It was very inspiring and really fits well to what I'm going to say. But in the meantime, just as a challenge to you, how, when you come to your clients, and they are technological companies, they are startups, they are already existing companies. How do you address those issues? Do you have a toolbox? Do you do a workshop? Because you have to know their culture, you have to know their end goals. It's all about money at the end, adding value. And it's a challenge for ethics, or basically to use it as a tool, but also to, at the end, fulfill the purpose of your engagement, in a way. Or you give up if you see they are not fit. This is also legitimate.
Yeah, actually that's a really good question. That it's really difficult to make people understand what is at stake when it comes to ethics. So we're doing 2 things, basically. The first one is that we are moving to compliance, because that's the first step. But we're trying to explain them, okay, that's not enough. You know, checking boxes, that's not enough. Because I've already had this kind of experience, and especially in the health industry, you check all the boxes, and at the very end you think that there is something that is still weird, and you cannot answer it through the GDPR. You have to go beyond that. So compliance, first point, and then we're creating what we call an ethical space. We are trying to make people aware of what ethics is and what their responsibility would be not to think about ethics. So it's a lobbying work, to be honest, because sometimes people feel like, okay, that's unnecessary. We don't want to hear about philosophy. It's not about lecturing about Emmanuel Kant philosophy. That's not the point. The point is to say, okay, what is your company? Think about your values. As the CEO, what are the limits you do not want to cross? What do you feel is acceptable for your company? What do you feel is not acceptable? That's up to you. That's the first thing. And then try to discuss with your collaborators and the people that you're working with. Try to see if they fit into that, or if they have different views, because maybe your own opinion as a CEO might change along the time, right? And you feel, okay, something that I found really acceptable is not that acceptable for this or that reason, right? So it's a discussion. You will not turn into an ethical space in 2 months. It will take something like 2-3 years, right? So you will go to training, you will go to discussion, debates, really important, creating tools also that will allow your collaborators to tell or say out loud what they think, because most of the time that's also a problem. People will disagree with the CEO, but they will not dare saying it out loud. So you have to offer the tools that will make those people be heard. And especially when you have an intercultural or multicultural setting, it's also important to make sure that when you're talking with a Muslim people, you must be aware that it's not the same as talking with a Buddhist people, which is not the same as talking with someone that is, you know, from the First Nation in Canada, right? The mindset is different. The mindset programming is really different. So you have to teach that. The big issue is that if you want to be really efficient about that, you need people to be really aware that it is important, right? And to accept that they have to put money on the table to have this kind of thing. That's the most difficult part.
Thank you. Any other?
So I wanted to ask, it was a great presentation.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask, do you see any way that you can move this discourse more openly in the industry? Like how do you make companies basically collaborate with philosophers in a way? Because the way I see it, I'm in the space, yeah. But the way I see it, it's kind of difficult to make these ideas open to you know, common program or whatever. And what I feel like is the issue is that it's quite difficult to get these ideas through, and even the open up the space in terms of some broader policies or EU legislature, and I do not see a way how this can be made effective. Like how can we push this initiative forward?
The first thing that we're trying to do is to go to the roots, is to teaching, right? We are making lots of courses in different, you know, universities or training institutions. Lots of them, especially in the engineering field or marketing field, are more and more interested, starting in bachelor years, about, okay, just try to open the mind of our students. So this is what we're trying to do. We've created, you know, different courses for different universities or institutions. So this is the first step. The second step is much more difficult because most of the time people are not aware of that, they're not really interested into that. So what we have to do, and this is where ethicist is a key word here, not philosopher. If I'm a philosopher from the academic world, I would come and tell you about Aristotle, about Wittgenstein, or whoever the philosopher that you focus on, right? But CEOs are not interested into that. So you have, and this is where it's really important, you have to have both the background in philosophy and the background on the real world, right? You have to work with real people that have real issues, that have real concerns, right? And our work is to bridge that gap between philosophers and real tech people, right? So it's a long process that you have to learn about the company has to learn from you, and the company, there is a need for a will from the company, right? Not only the CEO, but also the people to learn about all that. And then people that are a bit permissive about that, they will listen to you, not just hear you, they will listen to you, and at some point they will start asking questions. And most of the time what we've seen, our experience is that once you've started talking about that, people get really involved into that, and they find it really interesting. As long as, and this is really important, as you do not come to lecture them about what is acceptable and what is not. Because I don't know what is acceptable for this CEO or this CEO. Maybe for a CEO making benefits would be much more important than the well-being of its employees. That's not up to me to judge that. I might disagree as a human being, but that's not my job to say you're wrong, okay? I might say, okay, look, if you're going this way, this is what will happen, okay? But I'm not here to tell the people, okay, you must not do that or you must do that. I'm just trying to, we are just with DSC trying to make them think by themselves. This is all about that, right? I could tell you lots of things, but maybe you will disagree on that. And that's the point. If you disagree, then we can have a debate, then you will feel involved into that, and then people are eager to learn more and more and more and more. And you see quite soon that it's not just philosophy for the sake of philosophy. That's beautiful, philosophy is beautiful, but when you, once again, work in the real world, that's not what you need.
We don't have time for any questions because we have one more.
Thank you.
Emmanuel?
Oh.
It's a certificate of appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.